Chapter 1. The King in the Rain. The rain came down like a punishment. Mara pressed herself against the crumbling stone wall of the abandoned chapel, her breath clouding in the cold November air. Water streamed from the broken gutters above, pooling in the cracks of the cobblestone courtyard. Her coat, too thin, bought secondhand 3 years ago, clung to her shoulders like a sodden weight. She shouldn't have come this far into the old quarter. But the bakery had let her go that morning. Budget cuts, they'd said, though everyone knew it was because Mrs. Hendricks couldn't stand the sight of her anymore. Couldn't stand the reminder that Mara had been engaged to her son once, before he'd decided a fat girl with flour under her fingernails wasn't worth the embarrassment at the country club. So she'd walked. Walked until the gentrified streets gave way to ruins, until the tourist maps ran out, until she stood alone in a place that smelled of moss and old secrets. That's when she heard the child crying. The sound cut through the rain, thin, terrified, impossibly young. Mara's heart lurched. She pushed away from the wall, her shoes squelching in the mud as she followed the sound around the side of the chapel. The courtyard opened into a maze of fallen columns and overgrown graves. And there, beneath a stone archway blackened by centuries of weather, stood a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 5. Dark hair plastered to his pale forehead, wearing clothes that looked oddly formal. A silk shirt, tiny leather shoes, but torn and filthy. He stood perfectly still, staring at something Mara couldn't see. "Hey," she called softly, stepping forward. "Are you lost?" The boy didn't turn. Didn't even flinch. Mara's pulse quickened. She moved closer, her instinct screaming that something was wrong, that she should turn back, that this place was wrong in ways she couldn't name. Then she saw what the boy was staring at. A man lay collapsed against the base of a marble tomb, half hidden in shadow. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a long black coat that pooled around him like spilled ink. His head was bowed, dark hair falling across his face, one hand pressed to his side where something wet and dark stained the fabric. Blood. "Oh God," Mara breathed. She broke into a run, dropping to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" His head lifted slowly. Mara's words died in her throat. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from marble, skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Dark as midnight, ancient and wild, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Run," he said. His voice was rough, accented with something old and unplaceable. "Take the boy and run. You're hurt. I said run." The air around them shifted. Mara felt it before she saw it. A pressure, a wrongness, like the moment before lightning strikes. The boy whimpered. Then the shadows moved. 3 figures emerged from the darkness between the columns. They walked with an eerie, fluid grace, their movements too smooth to be natural. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark, expensive clothes that didn't belong in a place like this. The woman smiled. Her teeth were very white. "Alexander," she said, her voice lilting with amusement, still clinging to life. "How tedious." The wounded man, Alexander, shifted, trying to rise. His hand pressed harder against his side, and Mara saw the wound clearly now. Deep, vicious, bleeding far too much. "He wouldn't last long. Not without help. The covenant holds," Alexander said through gritted teeth. "You cannot touch the child." "The covenant," the woman repeated, laughing. "Your precious laws. You built them, Alexander. You enforced them for 300 years. And where are your houses now? Scattered, silent. You've been cast out, my king. The old rules died with your throne." She stepped closer. The 2 men flanked her, their eyes fixed on the boy with a hunger that made Mara's stomach turn. Without thinking, Mara stood. She positioned herself between the child and the strangers, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Stay back," she said. The woman's gaze slid to her, curious and cold. "And what is this, a pet? How quaint." "She's human," one of the men said, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Unturned, unmarked. Then she doesn't matter." The woman waved a dismissive hand. "Move, girl." Mara didn't move. She didn't know what these people were. Didn't understand the words they were saying. Covenant, houses, unturned, but she understood threat. She understood cruelty, and she'd spent enough years being invisible, being dismissed, being told she didn't matter. Not tonight. I said, "Stay back." The woman's smile faded. "You're very brave, or very stupid. Mara." Alexander's voice was strained. "Don't." She glanced back at him. He was trying to stand, one hand braced against the tomb, his face gray with pain. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat she saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or fear, not for himself, for her. The woman moved. 1 second she was 10 feet away. The next she was directly in front of Mara, faster than thought, her hand reaching for the child. Alexander lunged. He moved like a shadow given form, impossibly fast despite his wound. His body collided with the woman's, sending them both crashing into the mud. The other two surged forward, and suddenly the courtyard erupted into violence, blurred movement, the sound of impact. A snarl that didn't sound remotely human. Mara grabbed the boy and pulled him against her chest. He was shaking, silent tears streaming down his face. "It's okay," she whispered, though nothing about this was okay. "It's okay, I've got you." Alexander fought like something unleashed. But he was wounded, outnumbered, and Mara could see him faltering. One of the men caught him by the throat, slamming him back against the tomb with enough force to crack stone. The woman rose from the mud, her face twisted with rage. "Enough," she hissed. She raised her hand. Something glinted in the rain. A blade, long and silver, carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Alexander's eyes found Mara's across the courtyard. "Run," he mouthed. The blade descended, and Mara, without understanding why, screamed, "Stop!" The woman froze. They all froze. Alexander stared at her, his expression unreadable. The rain poured down, and in that suspended moment, Mara felt the weight of something ancient shift. Watching, waiting. The woman lowered the blade slowly. She looked at Mara with new interest, her head tilting like a predator scenting prey. "Well," she said softly, "perhaps you do matter after all." Chapter 2. The Bargain in Blood. The silence stretched like a blade between heartbeats. Mara's scream still echoed in her ears, though she hadn't meant to make a sound at all. The woman with the silver blade stood motionless, her eyes locked on Mara with an intensity that felt like being dissected. Behind her, the two men held Alexander pinned against the cracked marble. But their attention had shifted too. Everyone was staring at her. The boy's small hands clutched at Mara's wet coat, his face buried against her chest. She could feel his heart racing, or maybe that was her own, thundering so hard she thought she might be sick. "Interesting," the woman murmured. She took a step forward, the blade still gleaming in her hand. "You carry no mark, no binding, yet you stopped me with a command." Her smile sharpened. "How did you do that, little mortal?" I didn't. Mara's voice cracked. She forced herself to meet the woman's gaze, even as every instinct screamed at her to look away. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you?" The woman circled her slowly, like a wolf assessing prey. "The covenant is blood law. It answers to blood. You have no vampire blood in you. I can smell your humanity from here. All salt and fear and that dreadful mortal fragility." She paused directly in front of Mara. "And yet, when you commanded me to stop, something listened." Alexander made a sound, half growl, half warning. "Katya, leave her." The woman, Katya, didn't turn. "Oh, Alexander, always so protective of your strays. First the boy, now this soft little thing." Her voice dropped to something almost gentle, which was somehow worse. "Tell me, girl, why did you step between us and the child?" Mara's throat felt tight. "He's just a kid. He's property of House Corvus, bound by his bloodline to serve until his turning or his death, whichever comes first." Katya's tone was matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "His father broke an oath. The child pays the price. That's how it works." "That's insane," Mara whispered. "That's law." Let her go, Alexander said again. His voice was weaker now, strained with pain. Your quarrel is with me. She knows nothing of our world. Katya finally turned to face him. The two men holding him tightened their grip, and Mara saw Alexander's jaw clench against what must have been agony. Blood still seeped from the wound in his side, pooling on the muddy ground. My quarrel is with you, Katya agreed. You, who built the houses. You, who wrote the covenant in the blood of the first bloodlines. You ruled us for 3 centuries, Alexander, and we bowed. Her expression hardened. But you abandoned your throne, and now House Sarkos has risen in your place. We don't need your protection anymore. We don't need your mercy. Then why are you here? Alexander's eyes blazed despite his weakened state. If Sarkos is so powerful, why send 3 hunters after 1 exiled king? Something flickered across Katya's face. Too fast for Mara to read. Because, she said softly, you still have allies. Because there are whispers in the old courts that you might return. Because as long as you live, the houses remember what true power looks like. She raised the blade again. So we're going to make very sure you don't. The boy whimpered against Mara's chest. She felt him trembling, felt the cold rain soaking through both their clothes, felt the absolute wrongness of everything happening in this forgotten courtyard. And she thought, not like this. Not another. Ending written by people who treated others like they were disposable. Not another loss because someone decided she, or a child, or anyone, didn't matter enough to save. Wait, Mara heard herself say. What if I could help him, get him somewhere safe? Would you let them go? Katya laughed. Help him? You can barely stand upright. You're shaking so hard I can hear your bones rattle. I'm serious. Mara's voice steadied, even as her hands shook. You want him dead. Fine. But let me take the child first. Let me get him away from here. Then you can... She swallowed. Then you can do whatever you came to do. Mara, no. Alexander's voice was sharp. Don't bargain with them. But Katya was watching her now with something like fascination. You'd delay his death to save a child you don't know? A child who belongs to a world you don't understand? Yes. Why? Mara didn't have a good answer. Or maybe she had too many. Because she knew what it felt like to be treated as collateral damage. Because someone should give a damn. Because the boy's small hands were still clutching her coat, like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Because it's the right thing to do, she said finally. Katya studied her for a long moment. Then she sheathed the blade in one fluid motion. Very well. I'll make you a bargain, little mortal. Katya. One of the men started. She silenced him with a look. Take the king. Take the child. Get them to shelter before dawn. That gives you... She glanced at the sky, calculating. 4 hours. If you succeed, we'll grant you 1 night's grace. We won't hunt them until tomorrow's sunset. And if I fail? Then we take them both, and you'll wish you'd never stumbled into this courtyard. Katya smiled. Do we have a deal? Mara's mind raced. 4 hours. She didn't know where to go, didn't know what shelter meant in this context, didn't know if she could even move Alexander in his condition. But the alternative was watching them die right here, right now. Deal, she said. Katya nodded once. The 2 men released Alexander, and he collapsed forward onto his hands and knees in the mud. Mara started toward him, but Katya caught her arm, her grip cold as ice, strong enough to bruise. One more thing, Katya said softly. If you betray this bargain, if you run to the mortal authorities or try some foolish heroism, I will find you. I will make you watch while I drain that child dry. And then I will turn you. And you'll spend eternity remembering that you caused it. Understood? Mara's blood turned to ice. But she nodded. Katya released her. 4 hours, starting now. Then she and her companions were gone. simply vanished into the shadows between the columns, as if they'd never been there at all. Mara stood, alone in the rain with a wounded stranger and a terrified child, and absolutely no idea what to do next. Chapter 3. Sanctuary in shadows, Alexander tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Mara caught him, or tried to. He was solid muscle and dead weight, and she staggered under the impact as his shoulder hit hers. The boy yelped and scrambled back, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm okay," Mara gasped, though she absolutely wasn't. "I've got you." "You don't." Alexander's voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "You should have let her kill me. Shut up and lean on me." He did, reluctantly, his arm draping across her shoulders. He was freezing cold despite the blood loss. Shouldn't he be warm? Wasn't that how bodies worked? And he towered over her by at least 6 inches. Every step made him hiss through his teeth. "Where?" Mara asked, scanning the ruined courtyard. "Where do we go?" "North." He gestured weakly toward a gap in the chapel walls. "Old tunnels. Beneath the city. Tunnels," Mara repeated. "Great. Perfect. Nothing creepy about that." Despite everything, she thought she heard him make a sound that might have been a laugh. They moved slowly through the rain, Alexander's weight growing heavier with each step. The boy followed close behind, silent except for his ragged breathing. Mara kept glancing back to make sure he was still there, that he hadn't vanished like those creatures had. Creatures. God. What were they? The gap in the wall led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Mara hesitated at the top, peering down into the black. "There's no light," she said. "There will be." Alexander's breathing was labored. Keep going. She didn't have a choice. Not with 3 hours and 50-something minutes left on Katya's deadline. So she adjusted her grip on Alexander's waist, felt his blood seeping warm through her fingers, and started down. The stairs were slick with moss and centuries of moisture. Mara counted 37 steps before they reached the bottom and emerged into a tunnel carved from ancient stone. It smelled of earth and something older, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. Then, impossibly, light bloomed. Mara gasped. The walls were lined with crystals, or something like crystals, that glowed with a soft blue luminescence. They pulsed gently, as if breathing. "What is this place?" she whispered. "Old world," Alexander said. "Before your kind built their cities above. Some of us remember. Your kind?" The boy spoke for the first time, his voice small and frightened. "Are you going to hurt us?" "No." Alexander's answer was immediate, certain. "Never." They walked through the tunnels for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The passage branched and forked, a labyrinth that should have been impossible to navigate, but Alexander guided them with quiet directions even as his strength failed. Finally, they reached a door. It was iron, ancient, carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the blue light. Alexander pressed his palm against it, and Mara heard something click deep within the metal. The door swung open. Beyond was a room that looked like it had been frozen in time. Stone walls lined with shelves of books, real books, leather-bound and thick with age. A fireplace cold with ash, furniture covered in dust cloths, a massive bed in the corner, its posts carved with more of those strange symbols. "Safe," Alexander breathed. Then his legs gave out entirely. Mara lowered him to the floor as gently as she could, her muscles screaming. The boy rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Alexander's head. "Don't die," the child whispered. "Please don't die." "Not planning to," Alexander said, though his eyes were already starting to close. Mara's nursing instinct, born from years of caring for her grandmother before the end, kicked in automatically. "Stay with me," she ordered. "I need to see the wound." She helped him out of the long coat, then carefully pulled up his shirt. The boy made a small sound of distress. The wound was worse than she'd thought. Deep slashes across his ribs like something with claws had torn him open, but the edges were strange, blackened as if burned, and the blood that oozed from the cuts was darker than it should be, almost black in the dim light. "What did this?" she asked. "Silver blade," Alexander said through gritted teeth. "Blessed by old blood. It's poison. To my kind. Your kind." Mara looked at him, really looked at him. The too pale skin, the cold. The way he'd moved in the courtyard, faster than anything human. The way Katya had talked about houses and covenants and turning. "You're a vampire," she said flatly. He met her eyes. "Yes," the boy nodded solemnly. "He's the king, or he was. Before they cast him out." Mara sat back on her heels, her mind reeling. Vampires. Real, actual vampires. The kind that belonged in movies and books and late-night cable TV, not in abandoned chapels in the rain. She should have been terrified. Should have run screaming back up those stairs. Instead, she heard herself say, "How do I fix this?" Alexander blinked, surprise flickering across his face. "You can't. Silver poisoning has to burn through on its own. It will take time." "How much time?" "Hours, maybe more." He closed his eyes. "You should go. Take the boy. There's a door in the back that leads to the market district. You can disappear before dawn. What about you?" "I'll manage." "You can't even stand. Mara." He opened his eyes again, and there was something raw in them. Something that looked almost like pain, but not the physical kind. "You made a bargain to get us to shelter. You've done that. You don't owe me anything more." The boy's hand found Mara's. His fingers were small and cold. "Please," he whispered. "Can you stay? Just until he's better?" Mara looked at the child's frightened face. At Alexander's torn side. At the strange, glowing room that smelled of dust and old magic. She thought about the empty apartment waiting for her topside. The job she'd lost. The life that had been falling apart piece by piece for years now. She thought about the way Alexander had thrown himself between them and danger, even wounded. The way he'd warned her to run. The way he'd fought to protect a child who, by Katya's words, was nothing more than property. "I'll stay," she said quietly. Alexander stared at her. "Why?" Mara pulled off her soaked coat and rolled up her sleeves. "Because someone should. Now tell me where you keep your first aid supplies, or whatever vampires use instead." For the first time since she'd met him, Alexander smiled. It was small, pained, but genuine. "Cabinet," he said, "left of the fireplace." Mara stood and went to work. Chapter 4. The Weight of Wounds. The cabinet held things Mara had never seen before, bottles filled with liquids that glowed faintly in the darkness. Bandages that felt like silk but were strong as steel, dried herbs she couldn't name, tied in bundles with silver thread, and tucked in the back, a small vial of something that looked like liquid moonlight. "The clear one," Alexander said from where he lay on the floor. His voice was weaker now, thready. "It will slow the poison." Mara brought the vial back to him, along with the strange bandages in a bowl of water she'd found near the cold fireplace. The boy had curled up beside Alexander's shoulder, watching everything with those wide, solemn eyes. "What's your name?" Mara asked gently as she knelt. The child hesitated. "Luca." "Luca, that's a good name." She smiled at him, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "I'm Mara, and I'm going to help him, okay? But I need you to be brave." Luca nodded and scooted back slightly, giving her room to work. Mara uncorked the vial. The liquid inside smelled like wintergreen and something else. Something wild and cold, like a forest after snow. "How much?" "3 drops, Alexander said. Directly on the wound. She did as instructed, tilting the vial carefully. The liquid hit the blackened edges of the slashes and sizzled. Alexander's entire body went rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she heard his teeth grind. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Keep going," he gritted out. She cleaned the wound as gently as she could, using the water and soft cloth she'd found. The silver poisoning was spreading. She could see dark veins creeping out from the cuts, spiderwebbing across his pale skin. It looked wrong, like ink beneath glass. As she worked, she found herself noticing other things. Scars, old ones, faded to white lines across his ribs and abdomen. A tattoo over his heart, symbols that matched the ones carved into the door, and the sheer strength of him even weakened. His body was a weapon, honed by centuries she couldn't fathom. "How old are you?" she asked before she could stop herself. 347 years. Her hands stilled. God. No god had anything to do with it. His eyes opened, finding hers. "I was turned in 1678, 17 years old and dying of plague. A vampire named Serena found me in a mass grave, still breathing. She gave me a choice." "What choice?" Die human or live forever. He smiled bitterly. I was young, stupid, terrified of death. I chose wrong. Mara resumed cleaning the wound, mulling over his words. You think immortality is wrong? I think living long enough to watch everyone you love turn to dust is a special kind of torture. His gaze drifted to the ceiling. I think power without purpose is poison. I think... He trailed off, his breath hitching. Rest, Mara said softly. You can tell me later. She wrapped the strange bandages around his torso, marveling at how they seemed to mold to his skin, already beginning to glow with the same faint luminescence as the crystals in the tunnels. Alexander's breathing gradually steadied, the tension leaving his body in increments. Why were they after Luca? Mara asked quietly. Alexander was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been guilt. His father was one of mine, House Corvus, one of the original bloodlines I forged when I built the courts. They served as mediators, peacekeepers between the houses. He closed his eyes. When I abdicated, the power vacuum destroyed them. House Sarkos rose and demanded oaths from the survivors. Luca's father refused, so they killed him? Worse, they bound him in silver and left him for the sun. Alexander's jaw tightened. But before he burned, he invoked an old law, one I wrote. The right of sanctuary. He begged me to protect his son until Luca comes of age to choose his own path. Mara glanced at Luca, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep against Alexander's shoulder. And you said yes. I owed him that much. I owed all of them more than that. Alexander opened his eyes, and there was an ocean of pain in them, the kind that had nothing to do with his wounds. I built the houses to create order, to stop the slaughter, the chaos. For 200 years it worked. We had laws, courts, a civilization in the dark. His voice dropped. Then I grew tired. I watched the politics, the endless games, the way even immortals found reasons to hurt each other. So I walked away, and everything fell apart. Yes, the word was barely a whisper. Katya was right. As long as I lived, some still remembered what the courts could be, what I could be, and Sarkos can't consolidate power while that memory exists. Mara sat back, studying him. This ancient creature who spoke of centuries like she spoke of years, who had built and abandoned an empire, who was dying to protect a child because of a promise to a dead man. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. A monster, I guess. Something that sparkles in sunlight. She managed a weak smile. Movies lied to me. His laugh was dry, pained. We burn in sunlight. No sparkling. Just fire and screaming. He met her eyes. And we are monsters, Mara. Make no mistake about that. We drink blood to survive. We're stronger, faster, harder to kill than your kind. We've toppled kingdoms and slaughtered millions across history. His expression softened slightly. But we can also choose. That's the part they don't tell you. We're not slaves to instinct. We decide what we become. What did you choose to become? Tired, he said simply, and alone. The words hung in the air between them. Mara felt something shift in her chest. A recognition, maybe, because she knew what that felt like. That bone-deep exhaustion. That certainty that you'd been erased from the world long before your body caught up. I know that feeling, she admitted quietly. Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her feel suddenly, strangely visible. Why did you stop that night? In the courtyard. You could have walked away. I'm tired of walking away. The words surprised her with their honesty. I've been walking away from things for years. From confrontation. From fights I couldn't win. From people who made me feel small. She touched the edge of the bandage gently. Maybe I wanted to stand still for once. Even if it scared me. It should scare you. I know. She smiled slightly. But here I am anyway. Something passed across Alexander's face. Surprise, maybe. Or something deeper. Something that looked almost like hope. Here you are, he echoed softly. Outside, beyond the iron door and the glowing tunnels, dawn was breaking over the city. They had survived the night. Now they just had to survive what came after. Chapter 5. The hours. Between Mara woke to silence. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories rushed back. The rain, the courtyard, the tunnels glowing blue in the darkness. She'd fallen asleep in a chair near the fireplace, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion somewhere around dawn. Now the room was lit by those same strange crystals embedded in the walls, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. Luca was still curled beside Alexander, his small hand resting on the vampire's arm, as if to reassure himself that he was still there. Alexander's eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. He looked marginally better. The dark veins had receded slightly from the wound, though his skin was still far too pale. "You're awake," Mara said, her voice rough from sleep. His gaze shifted to her. "You snore. I do not, like a small, angry bear." Despite everything, Mara felt her lips twitch. "How long was I out?" 4 hours. Maybe 5. He shifted slightly, wincing. "It's afternoon now. We have until sunset before Katya's grace period ends." The reality settled over her like cold water. 7 hours, maybe 8 before they were hunted again, and Alexander could barely sit up without his face going gray. "Can you move?" she asked. "Not well." "Not fast." He looked at her steadily. "You should take Luca and go. There's money in the desk, mortal currency. Enough to get you both far from here. We've had this conversation. Mara, I stayed through the night. I'm not leaving now." She stood, brushing dust from her jeans. "So either help me figure out what to do next, or stop wasting energy trying to convince me to abandon you." Alexander stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "You're stubborn. I've been called worse. I believe it." She moved to the small kitchen area she'd spotted earlier, a stone counter with a basin, shelves stocked with preserved foods that looked decades old. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The bakery seemed like a lifetime ago now. "Is there anything here I can actually eat?" she called. "Top shelf, right side, the sealed tins." She found them. Modern, surprisingly. Crackers, dried fruit, cured meat. "Why do you have human food?" "Sometimes I have guests. Other humans? Sometimes." His voice was carefully neutral. "People who need sanctuary. Who stumble into places they shouldn't be, like you did." Mara brought the food back to the main room, settling cross-legged on the floor near him. She offered some to Luca, who took a handful of crackers and nibbled them quietly. The boy hadn't spoken since he'd told her his name. "Luca," Mara said gently, "are you okay?" He nodded, not meeting her eyes. "You can talk to me, or to Alexander. We're safe here, for now," Luca whispered. "But they'll come back. How Sarkos always comes back." He looked up at Alexander with eyes too old for his face. "My papa said that. Before they took him." Alexander's expression cracked, just for a moment. "Your father was brave. Braver than I was. He said you were the best king the house has ever had. He said you were fair. He was kind to lie. It wasn't a lie." Luca's voice was fierce now, desperate. "Everyone in House Corvus said it. You made rules that protected us. You stopped the blood wars. You made it so vampires couldn't just take people. You made them ask, made them promise to care for the ones they turned." Mara watched Alexander's face as the boy spoke. She saw guilt there, and grief, and something that looked like shame. "And then I left," Alexander said quietly. "I abandoned all of you to wolves like Katya." "Why?" Mara asked. "Why did you leave?" Alexander was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if he were looking at something very far away. "I had a sister, Irina. She was turned with me. We were dying together, and Serena offered us both the choice." He closed his eyes. "For 200 years we ruled together. She was everything I wasn't, warm, diplomatic, beloved. While I enforced the law with steel, she built bridges with words." "What happened to her?" Mara asked softly. "She fell in love with a human, a mortal woman named Elena." His jaw tightened. "The old laws I had written, forbade turning humans without their consent. But Elena was dying of consumption, and Irina couldn't let her go. So she broke the law. She turned her without permission." Mara's chest tightened. "And you had to enforce it." "I had to execute my own sister. For breaking a law I'd created to protect humanity from us." He opened his eyes, and they were full of centuries of pain. "I held Irina in silver chains while the sun rose. Elena tried to stop it, threw herself between us. They both burned. The room was silent except for the faint pulse of the crystals. After that," Alexander continued, "I couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't pretend the laws were just Couldn't pretend I was anything but a monster in a crown, enforcing order through fear and violence. He looked at Mara. So I walked away. Let the courts collapse. Let them tear each other apart. At least then I wouldn't be the one holding the blade. Luca had gone very still. My papa never told me that story. Because he was merciful. Alexander's voice was hollow. More merciful than I deserved. Mara felt something twist inside her chest. She thought about the weight of impossible choices. About doing what you thought was right and destroying everything anyway. About carrying guilt so heavy it turned you to stone. You were trying to protect people, she said. I was trying to control them. There's a difference. Maybe. But you're here now, protecting Luca. That has to count for something. Does it? He met her eyes. I'm too weak to fight. Too compromised to run. All I've done is drag you into danger. I chose to stay. Why? His voice was raw with genuine confusion. You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. You could be safe right now, far from all this. Mara thought about that, about the real answer, which was complicated and tangled with a lifetime of feeling invisible and disposable and tired of running from everything. Maybe I'm tired of being safe, she said finally. Maybe safe just means alone. Alexander stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten. Before he could respond, Luca suddenly tensed. Do you hear that? The boy whispered. They all went silent. And in the quiet, Mara heard it, faint, distant, but growing closer. Footsteps in the tunnel, multiple pairs, coming fast. Chapter 6. The laws. Written in blood, Alexander moved faster than Mara thought possible for someone half dead. He was on his feet in seconds, one hand braced against the wall, the other reaching for something beneath the dust cloth on a nearby table. When he pulled the cloth away, Mara saw weapons, blades of various lengths, all etched with the same strange symbols that covered the door. Take Luca, he said, his voice sharp with command. Back room. Behind the bookshelf on the eastern wall, there's a passage. It leads to the catacombs. What about you? I'll buy you time. You can barely stand. The footsteps were getting closer. Mara could hear voices now, low and urgent, echoing through the stone tunnels. Mara. Alexander looked at her, and his eyes were fierce despite the pain etched into his face. If they get past me, they'll kill the boy. You understand? Katya's grace was a game. She never intended to honor it. Luca's hand found Mara's, squeezing tight. She looked down at the child's terrified face, then back at Alexander. There has to be another way, she said. There isn't. The footsteps stopped, just outside the iron door. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then someone knocked. 3 measured raps that somehow sounded like a threat. Alexander's entire body went rigid. That's not Katya, he whispered. How do you know? Because Katya doesn't knock. Another 3 knocks. Then a voice, male and unfamiliar, called through the door. Alexander Constantine Dreven, by the authority of the Night Courts and the Ancient Covenant, we demand audience. Alexander's expression shifted from defensive to confused. Victor? Open the door, old friend. We haven't much time. Alexander hesitated, his hand still on a blade. Then, slowly, he moved to the door and pressed his palm against it. The locks clicked. The door swung open. 3 vampires stood in the tunnel beyond, but these were nothing like Katya and her hunters. They wore formal clothing, long coats with high collars, emblems pinned to their chests. 2 men and a woman, all carrying themselves with military precision. The man in front, Victor apparently, was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair. When he saw Alexander, relief flooded his face. Thank the old blood you're alive, Victor said. We heard about Sarkos's hunters. We came as fast as we could. We? Alexander leaned heavily against the doorframe. Who's we? What's left of the Loyalists? House Corvus remnants, House Marana, even some from Nightshade. Victor's gaze moved past Alexander to where Mara stood with Luca. His eyebrows rose slightly. And you have the boy. Good. That's why we're here. Explain. Quickly. Victor stepped inside, his companions following. They moved with that same eerie grace, scanning the room with sharp eyes. The woman's gaze lingered on Mara for a moment too long. House Sarkos has overplayed their hand, Victor said. They've been executing anyone who refuses their rule, ignoring the old laws. 3 nights ago, they burned an entire bloodline. 27 vampires gone in a single dawn. The courts are fracturing. Let them fracture, Alexander said flatly. We can't. Not like this. Sarkos is trying to rewrite the covenant itself. They want to eliminate the consent laws, the protection rights, all the safeguards you built. Victor's voice dropped. They want to return to the old ways, when humans were nothing but cattle. Mara's blood ran cold. Luca pressed closer against her side. Why come to me? Alexander asked. I abdicated. I have no authority. You wrote the covenant in your blood. The old magic still recognizes you as its architect. Victor pulled a scroll from inside his coat, ancient parchment bound with silver cord. We found this in the Corvus archives. It's a clause you wrote 300 years ago, a failsafe. If the reigning power violates the core tenets of the Tau covenant, the original bloodline can invoke a trial of houses. Alexander's face went pale. That law was theoretical, a deterrent. It was never meant to be used. Yet here we are. Victor held out the scroll. We have testimonies, evidence of Sarkos' violations. With your invocation and the boy as witness to Corvus's destruction, we can force a trial. And what? Alexander's laugh was bitter. Return to rule? Pretend I didn't abandon you all? No one expects you to rule again, the woman said quietly. Her voice was surprisingly gentle. We just need you to break Sarkos' claim. Reset the courts. Then you can disappear again if you wish. Alexander was silent, his jaw working. Mara watched the conflict play across his face, guilt warring with exhaustion, warring with something that might have been hope. What's a trial of houses? She asked. Everyone turned to look at her. Victor's expression softened slightly. A formal challenge, he explained. The accused house must answer charges before a gathering of all bloodlines. If found guilty of breaking the covenant, their claim to power is dissolved. And if Sarkos refuses to appear, then they're declared rogue. Every other house would be obligated to hunt them. They won't come willingly, Alexander said. Katya's smart. She knows a trial would expose everything Sarkos has done, which is why we need to force their hand. Victor's eyes gleamed. We have something they want. The boy. According to the old laws, Luca's testimony as a protected ward carries weight. Sarkos can't consolidate power while a living witness to their crimes exists under sanctuary. Luca's hand trembled in Mara's. She squeezed back, trying to offer comfort, even as her own heart raced. You want to use him as bait? Mara said flatly. We want to use him as justice, the woman corrected. There's a difference. Not to a 5-year-old, there isn't. Victor's gaze sharpened on her. And who are you exactly? The human who somehow commanded Katya to stop? Yes, we heard about that. It's all over the underground. A mortal woman with no marks, no binding, who gave an order, and the covenant listened. Mara's mouth went dry. I don't understand what that means. Neither do we. Victor looked at Alexander. Which is why we need answers. From you. From her. From whatever force moved through that courtyard last night. Alexander's hand went to his wounded side, his face gray. I can't invoke a trial like this. I'm barely standing. Silver poisoning will take days to burn through. Then we'll wait. We don't have days. Katya's grace ends at sunset. She'll come. She'll bring more hunters this time. And if I can't fight. He trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. So we move you, Victor said. There's a safe house 2 miles north, warded properly. You can heal there while we prepare. And if Sarkos finds us first, then we fight. Victor's voice was steel. House Marana didn't survive 4 centuries by running from battles. Alexander looked at Luca, at Mara, at the room that had been his sanctuary and was now a trap. "If I do this," he said slowly, "if I invoke the trial, Sarkos will try to kill everyone involved. They'll come with everything they have. I know. People will die. They're already dying." Victor's expression was grim. "At least this way, they die fighting for something." Alexander closed his eyes. Mara saw the weight of it crushing him, the choice between hiding and hoping, or standing and risking everything. "Alexander," she said quietly. He opened his eyes, meeting hers. "What do you want to do?" The question seemed to surprise him, as if no one had asked him that in centuries. "I want." He stopped, started again. "I want there to be a world where children like Luca aren't hunted for their bloodlines." "Then help make it," Mara said simply. Something shifted in his expression. Decision, resolution. He turned to Victor. "Send word. I invoke the trial." Chapter 7. When darkness breaks, they had less than an hour before sunset, when everything went wrong. Victor's companions, Soren and Alara, had left to secure the safe house and send word to the remaining loyalist houses. Victor stayed behind to help move Alexander, but the Vampire King's condition had worsened. The silver poisoning was fighting back against the treatment, spreading dark veins up his neck. "We need to move now," Victor said, checking the tunnel entrance for the third time. "Once night falls, Katya will have full strength. We won't make it 2 miles in the open." "He can't walk that far," Mara said, watching Alexander struggle to stay upright against the wall. His skin had gone translucent, showing the network of veins beneath like a map of his dying. "Then we carry him. And if we're attacked?" Victor's silence was answer enough. Luca sat on the bed, clutching a small leather journal Victor had given him, something that had belonged to his father. The boy hadn't spoken since they'd agreed to the trial, had just nodded when Victor explained that he would need to testify, to tell the court what Sarkos had done. Mara moved to sit beside him. "Hey. You okay?" Luca shook his head. "Yeah. Me neither." She offered him a small smile. "But we're going to get through this. All of us." "My papa said that too," Luca whispered, "before they came." Mara's heart cracked. She pulled the boy against her side, feeling him tremble. "Your papa was trying to protect you, just like Alexander is now, just like we all are. But what if it's not enough? What if they—" The iron door exploded inward. Metal shrieked and tore as the ancient lock shattered. The door crashed against the stone wall, and Katya stepped through the wreckage like a queen entering her throne room. She wasn't alone. Behind her came at least a dozen vampires, all dressed in the dark red and black of House Sarkos. They moved with predatory synchronization, fanning out to surround the room. The 2 hunters from the courtyard were among them, both smiling with cold anticipation. "Oh, Alexander," Katya said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You look dreadful. Silver poisoning really doesn't agree with you, does it?" Victor moved instantly, positioning himself between Katya and Alexander. "You violate sanctuary. The Covenant is dead," Katya interrupted. "Written by a king who abandoned his throne, enforced by houses that no longer exist. We are the new order now." "The trial has been invoked," Victor said. "By ancient law, you must answer the charges." Katya laughed. "Must I? And who will enforce this law? You? The scattered remnants of broken houses?" She looked past him to Alexander, or perhaps the fallen king himself, who can barely stand. Alexander pushed away from the wall, straightening despite the obvious agony it cost him. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of authority. "I am Alexander Constantine Draven, first of my line, architect of the Covenant, builder of the Night Courts." His eyes blazed. "And I say you answer Katya Sarkos, or be named Oathbreaker before all the houses." For a moment, something flickered in Katya's expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or the faintest trace of fear. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "The old world is burning," she said, "and you're just ash pretending to be fire." She moved. So did Victor. They collided in the center of the room with enough force to crack the stone floor. The other Sarkos vampires surged forward, and suddenly the sanctuary erupted into violence. Mara grabbed Luca and dove behind the bed, her heart hammering. She could hear the sounds of combat, impacts that sounded like breaking stone, snarls that weren't remotely human, the whistle of blades cutting air. The passage, Alexander's voice cut through the chaos. He was somehow beside them, moving on instinct despite his wounds. "Now!" He pressed his hand against a section of the wall near the bookshelf. Stone ground against stone, revealing a narrow opening barely wide enough for a person. "Go," he ordered. "What about you?" Mara demanded. "I'll hold them." One of the Sarkos vampires broke through Victor's defense, rushing toward them. Alexander shoved Mara and Luca through the opening, then turned to face the attacker. The vampire was younger, faster, uninjured. He slammed Alexander against the wall with brutal efficiency. "The mighty king," the vampire sneered. "Look at you now." Alexander's hand shot out, faster than Mara's eyes could track, and grabbed the vampire's throat. "I'm old," he said quietly. "Not helpless." He twisted. The vampire's neck snapped with a sound like breaking branches, but the effort cost him. Alexander collapsed to his knees, his face gray, blood seeping fresh through the bandages. "Alexander." Mara lunged back through the opening, catching him before he fell completely. "Go," he gasped. "Please." "Not without you." Two more Sarkos vampires were pushing through, closing in. Victor was fighting three at once, barely holding them back. And Katya was watching it all with cold satisfaction. Mara looked at the passage, at Luca's terrified face, at Alexander dying in her arms, and something inside her broke open. "No," she said. The word came out stronger than she intended, echoing strangely in the stone chamber. "No, this ends. Now." She didn't know why she said it, didn't understand the force that moved through her, the same way it had in the courtyard when she'd commanded Katya to stop. But this time was different. This time the air itself seemed to crystallize. Every vampire in the room froze. Not like before, not momentarily. This was absolute. They stood like statues, their faces locked in expressions of shock and rage and confusion. Even Katya couldn't move. Only her eyes shifted, widening as they fixed on Mara. "What?" Alexander breathed. "What are you?" Mara had no answer. She could feel something humming through her bones, something old and vast and completely foreign. The crystals in the walls blazed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Victor managed to turn his head slightly, the only one with enough strength to break the hold partially. "The Covenant," he whispered, awe in his voice. "She's touching the Covenant itself." "That's impossible," Alexander said. "Only vampire blood can access, unless she's bound to the original architect," Victor interrupted, staring at Mara. "Unless somehow when you protected her in the courtyard, when you spilled your blood, in her defense..." He stopped, the implication hanging in the air. Alexander's eyes went wide. "No, I didn't. I couldn't have." "Accidental bonds are the strongest," Victor said. "You know this." Mara's head was spinning. "What are you saying?" "He's saying," Katya managed through gritted teeth, her voice strained, with the effort of speaking through the hold, "that you're bound to the Vampire King, that his blood recognized you, that you carry his authority now." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. But Mara looked down at her hands and saw them glowing with the same faint luminescence as the crystals. Felt the power thrumming through her, foreign yet somehow right. "How long can you hold them?" Victor asked urgently. "I don't know," Mara said. "I don't even know what I'm doing." "Then we run. Now. While we still can." Alexander tried to protest, but his strength was gone. Victor hauled him up, supporting his weight. Mara grabbed Luca's hand, and together they fled through the passage. Behind them, Mara felt the hold beginning to crack, and she heard Katya's voice, cold with promise. "We will find you, little mortal, and when we do, you'll wish you'd never learned our king's name." The stone ground shut behind them, sealing them in darkness. They ran. Chapter 8. The Truth Between Breaths. The catacombs were older than the tunnels, ancient stone carved by hands that predated memory. They ran through the darkness, guided only by Victor's preternatural sight and the faint glow still emanating from Mara's hands. She tried not to think about that, about what it meant, about the impossible thing Katya had said. Bound to the vampire king. Alexander was barely conscious, his weight growing heavier against Victor with each step. Luca kept pace beside Mara, his small hand clutching hers so tightly her fingers went numb. "There," Victor said finally, pointing to a junction where 3 passages met. "The safe house is above. But we need to—" Alexander's legs gave out completely. Victor caught him, lowering him carefully to the stone floor. Even in the dim light, Mara could see how bad it had gotten. The dark veins had spread to his face now, crawling up from his collar like invasive roots. "He's dying," she whispered. "The silver is consuming him from the inside," Victor confirmed grimly. "He needs blood. Fresh blood. Soon." Mara's stomach turned. "Human blood? It's the only thing that can fight the poison now. Animal blood isn't strong enough." Victor looked at her steadily. "You understand what I'm asking?" She did, and the thought terrified her. But when she looked down at Alexander's gray face, at the vampire who had thrown himself between her and danger, who carried centuries of guilt for trying to protect people. "How much?" she asked. "Mara, no." Alexander's eyes opened, unfocused. "Don't. How much?" she repeated to Victor. "Enough to matter. More than is safe for you to give. Victor." Alexander's voice was a rasp. "I forbid it." "You're not king anymore," Victor said gently. "You don't get to forbid anything." Alexander tried to rise and fell back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "I won't take from her, not like this. Not because she feels obligated. I don't feel obligated," Mara interrupted. She knelt beside him, her glowing hands trembling slightly. "I'm choosing this. Do you understand? I'm choosing." His eyes found hers, and in them she saw a war, need against refusal, survival against honor, 300 years of rules against the desperate present. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you chose to protect us. Because Luca needs you. Because—" She stopped, surprised by the truth that wanted to surface. "Because I'm tired of standing aside while people I care about suffer." Something shifted in his expression. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Victor cleared his throat. "We don't have time for philosophy. The bond between you changes things, but it doesn't slow the poison. Alexander, if you won't feed, you'll die. And if you die, the trial dies with you. Sarkos wins." Alexander's jaw clenched. Mara watched the conflict play out across his face, every instinct he'd built over centuries screaming against this. "There are rules," he said finally, his voice strained. "The consent laws, I wrote them. A vampire cannot take blood without clear permission, without understanding." "I understand," Mara said firmly. "And I'm giving permission." "You don't understand." "Not really. Feeding creates connections, intimacy. It's not just sustenance. It's sensation, emotion, memory. You'll feel what I feel, see what I see." His eyes were desperate. "I don't want you to carry my darkness." "Then don't make me watch you die instead." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Victor made a low sound. "I'll take the boy above. Give you privacy." He scooped up Luca gently. 5 minutes, no more. We need to keep moving." They disappeared up a narrow staircase, leaving Mara alone with Alexander in the ancient dark. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander said quietly, "Your wrist. That's safest, most controlled." Mara's heart hammered as she extended her arm. "What do I do?" "Nothing. Just breathe. And if it becomes too much, if you want me to stop, push against my shoulder." "I'll feel it." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Alexander took her wrist with surprising gentleness. His hands were freezing, but his touch was careful, reverent even. He looked up at her one last time, his dark eyes searching hers. "Thank you," he whispered. Then his lips touched her skin. The first sensation was cold. The press of his mouth, the scrape of teeth finding the vein. Mara tensed, expecting pain. But when his fangs pierced her skin, it wasn't pain at all. It was everything. Heat bloomed from the point of contact, spreading through her like liquid warmth. She felt his pull, the draw of blood from vein to mouth, and with it came a rush of sensation that stole her breath. She felt his relief, bone deep, desperate. Felt his guilt, sharp and cutting. Felt the poison retreating, burning away under the flood of her life pouring into him. But more than that, she felt him. Memories flickered at the edges of her consciousness. A girl with dark hair laughing in sunlight. Irina. The weight of a crown that wasn't metal but responsibility. The moment he'd first seen Mara in the courtyard and felt something he'd thought long dead stir in his chest. Curiosity. Recognition. Hope. Mara gasped, her free hand finding his shoulder, not to push away, but to steady herself against the intimacy of it. This was what he'd meant, this connection, this vulnerability. She felt him trying to pull back, to take only what was necessary. But she also felt his hunger, centuries of control barely leashed, the temptation to take more, to drink deeper, stop, she thought, and felt the word resonate between them through the blood bond. Alexander pulled back immediately, releasing her wrist. He looked stricken, his mouth stained with her blood, his eyes wide with something between horror and wonder. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I'm so sorry." "Don't." Mara pressed her hand against the puncture wounds, feeling them already starting to close, his saliva sealing them, another impossibility. "Don't apologize. You stopped when I asked. You felt it, felt me. I tried to shield you, but the bond—" He stopped, looking away. "You shouldn't have had to carry that." Mara realized she was crying. Not from pain or fear, but from the sheer weight of what she'd experienced. 300 years of loneliness, of duty, of loving and losing and choosing to feel nothing rather than risk feeling too much. "You're not a monster," she said softly. He looked at her like she'd struck him. "You can't know that. Not after feeling— I felt everything. The guilt. The grief. But also the reason you carry it. Because you care. Because you tried to build something better. Even when it cost you everything." She reached out, touching his face gently. "Monsters don't break themselves trying to protect people." Alexander's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his cheek. His skin was already warmer, color returning. The dark veins were receding, the poison retreating. "The bond," he said quietly. "It will fade in time. Once we're apart long enough, what if I don't want it to fade?" The question surprised them both. Alexander stared at her, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. "Mara," footsteps echoed from above. Victor's voice called down, "We have company. Sarkos scouts half a mile out. We need to move, now!" The moment shattered. Alexander stood, moving with a strength that had been absent minutes ago. He helped Mara up, steadying her when she swayed. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." She took a breath, pushing down the dizziness. "Let's go." They climbed the stairs together, emerging into a hidden cellar beneath what looked like an abandoned church. Victor was there with Luca and 2 other vampires Mara didn't recognize, both armed, both wearing the emblem of House Marana. "The trial convenes in 3 nights," one of them said. "The Court of Shadows. We've sent formal summons to all surviving houses." "And Sarkos?" Alexander asked. "They're hunting." "They know what you're planning." The vampire's expression was grim. "They'll try to kill you all before the trial begins." "Then we don't give them the chance." Alexander's voice was stronger now, carrying command again. "We go to ground. Protect the witnesses. Let them come." Victor smiled grimly. "Welcome back, my king." "I'm not. You invoked the trial. You're protecting the covenant. Whatever you want to call yourself, you're leading again." Victor glanced at Mara. "Both of you are." Mara opened her mouth to protest, but the glow in her hands pulsed once, as if in agreement. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and somewhere in that darkness Katya was coming. Chapter 9. The night before war. The safe house was a fortress disguised as a ruin. From the outside, it looked like another abandoned building in the old quarter, crumbling brick, boarded windows, graffiti covering the walls. But inside, past the warded doors and down another set of ancient stairs, it opened into a network of rooms that hummed with protective magic. Mara felt it the moment they crossed the threshold, a pressure against her skin, like walking through a waterfall. The glow in her hands flared briefly, then settled. "The wards recognize you," Victor said, watching her with interest. "Because of the bond. They read you as House Draven now." "House Draven doesn't exist anymore," Alexander said quietly. "Doesn't it?" Victor gestured around the room, where a dozen vampires were gathered. Mara recognized Soren and Alara from earlier, but the others were strangers, all wearing different house emblems, all watching Alexander with expressions that ranged from hope to desperation to barely concealed awe. They came as soon as word spread that you'd invoked the trial. Remnants of Corvus, Marana, Nightshade. Even two from House Sylvanus, and they haven't answered a summons in 50 years. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to rebuild an empire." "We don't need an empire," an older vampire said, stepping forward. She had silver hair and eyes like ice. "We need justice. We need someone to remind Sarkos that the covenant wasn't written in sand. And if I fail, if the trial doesn't, then at least we tried." The woman's voice was steel. "At least we stood for something." Mara watched Alexander struggle with the weight of their expectations. She could still feel the echo of his emotions through the blood bond, guilt and responsibility and fear all tangled together. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. He looked at her, surprised. Then his fingers closed around hers, holding tight. "We need to prepare Luca," Victor said, breaking the moment. "He's the primary witness. Sarkos will challenge his testimony, try to discredit him or claim he's too young to understand what he saw." "He's 5, Mara said. "He shouldn't have to face them." "He shouldn't have to," Victor agreed gently. "But he's the only one who can testify to his father's execution. The only proof that Sarkos violated sanctuary law." Luca sat in the corner with Soren, the vampire showing him something in an old book. The boy looked so small, so fragile against the weight of what was coming. "I'll be with him," Mara heard herself say, "when he testifies. If he has to do this, he won't be alone." "You can't," Alexander said immediately. "The trial is vampire law. Humans aren't permitted in the Court of Shadows." "Then change the law." "I can't just—" "You wrote it," Mara interrupted. "Victor said the covenant recognizes you. So invoke another clause, create an exception, do whatever you have to do." She met his eyes. "Because I'm not letting him face them alone." Alexander stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled, small and tired, but genuine. "You're going to be the death of me." "Too late. You're already dead." Victor coughed, but Mara could have sworn she saw him hiding a smile. "There is one option," Victor said slowly. "If she's truly bound to you, if the covenant recognizes her as House Draven, she could claim protection rights. Stand as the boy's guardian under your authority." "That would make her a target," Alexander said flatly. "Every vampire in that court would see her as a threat to the old order. A human with covenant authority? They'd have to go through you first," Victor finished. "Which is the point." The room had gone quiet. All the gathered vampires were watching now, waiting to see what Alexander would decide. He looked at Mara. "If I do this, if I bring you before the court, there's no going back. You'll be bound to vampire politics, to our world, for as long as the bond holds." "How long is that?" "I don't know. Accidental bonds are unpredictable. Could be weeks. Could be—" He stopped. "Could be forever," Mara finished quietly. "Yes." She thought about her old life. The bakery job she'd lost. The empty apartment. The years of feeling invisible. Of being told in 1,000 small ways that she didn't matter. That she was too much. Too soft. Too wrong for the world she'd been born into. Then she thought about standing in that courtyard, refusing to move. Thought about Alexander's hand in hers, Thought about Luca's trust and Victor's hope and the strange, terrifying sensation of mattering. Do it, she said. Make me official. Whatever that takes. Alexander searched her face. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Something shifted in his expression. Wonder and fear and something else she couldn't name. He raised her hand, still clasped in his, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, formal, but there was nothing cold about it. Then I invoke House Draven's protection, he said, his voice carrying through the room. I name Mara, he paused. I don't know your full name. Mara Catherine Walsh, she supplied. I name Mara Catherine Walsh as ward and guardian under my authority. By blood bond and ancient right, she stands with me before the court. The air shimmered. Mara felt something settle over her shoulders like a cloak. Invisible but weighted. The glow in her hands pulsed once, bright, then faded to a subtle shimmer. It's done, Victor said quietly. The Covenant has witnessed it. One of the vampires, a young man with dark skin and House Corvus emblems, knelt. My king, my lady. Don't, Alexander said sharply. I'm not, but others were kneeling too. One by one, the gathered vampires bowed their heads. You're giving them hope, Victor murmured. Let them have this. Alexander looked at Mara, helpless. She squeezed his hand, and somehow that seemed to steady him. Rise, he said finally. Please. We're not here to revive old ceremonies. We're here to ensure Luca gets justice, that the Covenant means something again. His voice strengthened. How Sarkos believes might makes right. That fear is enough to rule. We're going to prove them wrong. And if they attack before the trial? Soren asked. We have 12 fighters. They have 40, maybe more. Then, we use what they don't expect, Alexander looked at Mara. We use strategy, intelligence, and we use the one advantage they can't. Predict. A human who can touch the Covenant itself, like? Eyes turned to Mara. She felt her pulse quicken. I don't know how to control it, she admitted. What happened back there? I just reacted. I don't even know what I did. Then we figure it out, Victor said. We have 2 days before the trial. 2 days to teach you what we can, to prepare Luca, to fortify our position. 2 days, the silver-haired vampire repeated. Against 3 centuries of Sarkos's planning. We've faced worse odds, Alexander said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Luca appeared at Mara's side, slipping his small hand into hers. Will we win? He asked in a whisper. Mara looked down at him, at his father's journal clutched in his other hand, at the hope and fear warring in his young face. Yes, she said, praying it wasn't a lie. We will. But outside the warded walls, Katya stood in the darkness with 40 vampires at her back, and she smiled. Chapter 10. The Trial of Blood and Choice. The Court of Shadows met in a place that shouldn't exist. Beneath the city, deeper than the tunnels, deeper than the catacombs, there was a cavern carved from living stone. Crystals the size of trees grew from floor to ceiling, pulsing with that same blue luminescence Mara had seen everywhere in this hidden world. The air hummed with ancient power, and everywhere, there were vampires. They filled the chamber, hundreds of them, standing in clusters marked by their house colors. Red and black for Sarkos, silver and blue for Marana, deep green for what remained of Corvus. Others Mara didn't recognize, wearing emblems she'd never seen. All of them turned to watch as Alexander entered. He wore formal clothing now, a long black coat with silver fastenings, symbols embroidered at the collar in thread that seemed to glow. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp lines of his face. He looked every inch the King Victor claimed he still was. Mara walked beside him, wearing clothes Alara had found for her. Simple but elegant, dark enough to blend with the shadows. Luca held her hand on one side. Victor flanked her on the other. She could feel every eye on them. Could hear the whispers spreading through the crowd like wind through grass. The human, the one who commanded Katya, the bondmate. Steady, Alexander murmured without looking at her. Through the blood bond, she felt his own nervousness masked under layers of practiced calm. They can smell fear. Good thing I'm terrified then, she whispered back. Wouldn't want to disappoint. His lips twitched. You're remarkable. Before she could respond, a voice rang out across the chamber, amplified somehow, echoing from the crystals themselves. The court recognizes Alexander Constantine Draven, first of his line, architect of the Covenant. The speaker was a vampire who looked older than time itself, standing on a raised platform of stone. You have invoked a trial of houses. State your charge. Alexander stepped forward, his voice carrying with the same supernatural resonance. I charge House Sarkos with violation of the Covenant, with execution of protected bloodlines, with breaking sanctuary law, with rewriting blood oaths to serve their power. He paused, and with attempting to murder witnesses to prevent this trial. The chamber erupted in voices, some shouting support, others protest. The ancient vampire raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade. House Sarkos, you stand accused. How do you answer? Katya emerged from the red and black cluster, moving with lethal grace. She wore armor, actual armor, black as midnight, fitted to her like a second skin. Behind her came the two hunters from the courtyard, and behind them, a figure Mara hadn't seen before. He was tall, broader than Alexander, with hair like burnished copper and eyes that glowed red in the crystal light. Power radiated from him in waves that made Mara's skin crawl. Lord Casimir Sarkos, Victor whispered, the head of House Sarkos. I didn't know he'd come personally. Casimir's smile was all teeth. We answer that the charges are fantasy. Propaganda from a fallen king desperate to reclaim relevance. His gaze swept over Alexander with contempt. You abdicated, Draven. You abandoned us. You have no authority here. The Covenant disagrees. Alexander's voice was ice. I wrote it in my blood. It answers to me still, does it? Casimir gestured, and one of his vampires came forward carrying something, a silver urn ornately carved. Then perhaps you can explain this. The ashes of House Corvus's blood oath, dissolved, broken, by your law that allowed abdication without naming a successor. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Mara felt Alexander's shock through the bond. That law, Alexander said carefully, was meant to prevent tyranny, to ensure no vampire could hold power indefinitely. And yet it created chaos. Casimir's voice rose. 50 years of houses warring for control because you left us leaderless. Bloodlines destroyed because you couldn't be bothered to finish what you started. He pointed at Luca. That child's father died because of your weakness, not mine. Luca's hand trembled in Mara's. She squeezed back, trying to project strength she didn't feel. Lies, Victor called out. House Corvus was murdered under sanctuary. The boy witnessed. The boy is 5 years old and traumatized, Katya interrupted smoothly. He'll say whatever Draven coached him to say. I didn't. Luca's small voice was swallowed by the chamber's vastness. Mara felt something shift inside her. Anger, hot and bright. That same force that had frozen Katya before stirred in her chest. Let him speak, she said. The words came out amplified, resonating through the crystals. Every vampire in the chamber turned to stare at her. Casimir's eyes narrowed. And who are you to command this court, mortal? She is ward of House Draven, Alexander said, stepping slightly in front of her. Bound by blood and recognized by the Covenant. She has the right to— She has no rights. Casimir's voice was venomous. She's a pet. A human playing at vampire politics. The Covenant was written for our kind, not hers. Then why did it answer when I commanded? Mara asked. Her hands were beginning to glow again. That strange luminescence spreading up her arms. Why did it freeze your hunters when I told them to stop? The chamber went utterly silent. Casimir's expression darkened. Parlor tricks. Some bastard magic Draven taught you. I taught her nothing, Alexander said. The bond formed by accident. When I protected her. When my blood recognized hers as— He stopped, and through their connection, Mara felt his realization crash over him like a wave. As what? Katya pressed. Alexander looked at Mara, his eyes wide. As family, he whispered. The Covenant only creates bonds between bloodlines. Between family. That's impossible, Victor breathed. She's human. She can't be— My sister had a daughter, Alexander said slowly, his voice distant with memory. Before she was turned, before I knew her, she gave the baby to a mortal family, made them promise to hide her lineage. His gaze locked on Mara. What was your grandmother's name? Mara's mouth went dry. Elena Constantine. The chamber exploded. Vampires were shouting, arguing, some lunging forward before being held back by their own houses. The ancient vampire on the platform was calling for order, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Through it all, Alexander stared at Mara like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're Irina's bloodline," he said. "You're my great-great-great-grandniece. That's why the bond. That's why you can touch the covenant. You carry Draven blood. I'm human," Mara said, her voice shaking. "My grandmother was human. She died of cancer. She wasn't—" She was turned, Alexander interrupted gently. "Then chose mortality again. It's rare but possible in the first year. The blood remembers, even generations later." Casimir's face had gone pale. "If that's true, if she carries original bloodline, then she has as much claim to invoke the covenant as I do," Alexander finished. He turned to face the court, his voice ringing with authority. "I present Mara Walsh, last daughter of House Draven, and she stands as witness to Sarkos's crimes." Mara felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, felt the power in her blood responding to Alexander's declaration, felt Luca's hand in hers, and the bond humming between her and the vampire who was, impossibly, her family. "Tell them," Alexander said softly. "Tell them what you saw." And Mara, who had spent her life being invisible, stepped forward into the light.